The hangar at Nellis Air Force Base woke before the sun did. Floodlights painted the concrete silver, throwing long shadows across rows of sleeping jets. The air smelled of fuel, oil, and the metallic tang of heated steel. Mechanics moved like ghosts between aircraft, their boots echoing softly against the polished floor. Among them was Sergeant Emily Carter, already deep in her work, while most of the base still shook off sleep. Emily's world had narrowed to the rhythm of a wrench, the steady click of torque on bolts, the faint hiss of hydraulic checks. She didn't need music or chatter. The sound of machines breathing was enough. She crouched beneath the open belly of an F-35 Lightning II, fingers tracing the smooth casing as if reading a story written in metal. "Morning, Carter," called Airman Dillon, yawning, coffee in hand. "You're at it early again." Emily gave a brief nod without looking up. "Jets don't sleep, Dillon." "Neither should we." He laughed lightly, not knowing whether she was joking. No one really knew Emily. She'd transferred to Nellis less than a year ago, quietly competent, politely distant. She did her job better than anyone else. Her reports flawless, her fixes fast, yet she avoided the mess hall, skipped small talk, and disappeared after shifts. Most of the younger airmen respected her, though they didn't understand her. To them, she was simply the quiet mechanic, a woman who kept her head down and her hands busy. Across the hangar, Major David Rourke, the squadron commander, strode in with his clipboard. He was a man who liked order and precision, and he trusted Emily because she delivered both. "Carter," he called out, his voice echoing off the steel beams. "How's my fleet looking?" She wiped her hands on a rag and turned, posture straight, expression unreadable. "F-35s 1 through 6 are green, sir. 7's still running diagnostics. There's a minor fault in the navigation firmware. Intermittent, not critical, but I'd like another hour before sign-off." Rourke checked his watch. "We launch in 2. Can it hold?" Emily hesitated, glancing at the diagnostic screen where a faint orange line blinked like a heartbeat. "It should, sir." "But should isn't the same as will." Rourke studied her for a second. "We can't afford delays. Patch it, sign it, and clear it for launch." "Yes, sir." He left, his boots striking sharp against the concrete. Emily turned back to the jet. The orange light pulsed again, slow and patient. She narrowed her eyes. Something about it bothered her. The pattern of the fault, the irregular timing. It reminded her of a problem she'd seen years ago, on an older model under very different skies. But the memory slipped away before she could grasp it. She exhaled, keyed a few commands, and watched the alert fade to green. Problem solved, or at least hidden. As dawn stretched across the desert, sunlight spilled through the hangar doors, bathing the jets in gold. The squadron of pilots arrived in crisp flight suits, laughing, slapping shoulders, radiating confidence. To them, this was another training day, a high-tech ballet in the sky. To Emily, it was a test of trust between human and machine. She watched them prepare with detached focus. Most pilots barely noticed the mechanics who made their flight possible. A few nodded in acknowledgement. None stopped to talk. She didn't mind. She'd long ago accepted her role in the shadows. The limelight belonged to those who flew. Still, as she watched Lieutenant Mark Henderson, call sign Viper 3, climb into his cockpit, a flicker of unease crossed her mind. He was young, barely out of his 20s, yet already confident enough to joke with the crew. "Hey, Carter," he called down, grinning. "Make sure you tightened everything. I'm not interested in an early landing." Emily allowed herself a faint smile. "Everything's tighter than your flight plan, Lieutenant." He laughed, giving her a thumbs up before sealing the canopy. When the engines roared to life, the entire hangar trembled. Heat waves rippled through the air, distorting her reflection in the jet's metal skin. She stepped back, hands on her hips, eyes following the planes as they taxied out one by one. Inside the control tower, lights blinked and screens flickered to life. Emily moved to her monitoring station, a small desk lined with screens displaying real-time diagnostics. She preferred this corner, quiet and out of the way. From here she could watch her fleet without distraction. As the F-35S lifted off, a thrill stirred inside her chest, the same rush she'd once felt years ago, before missions of her own. The desert floor trembled under the thunder of takeoff. 6 sleek silhouettes sliced through the morning sky, disappearing into the vast blue. For a few moments, Emily simply watched in silence, her reflection faint in the glass. She missed it, the feeling of flight, the surge of adrenaline, the thin line between control and chaos. But that part of her life was gone. She was a mechanic now. Safer, quieter, invisible. She turned back to her monitors, scanning through system data. Everything read clean. Then, as the jets climbed higher, a flicker caught her eye. A split-second blip on Viper 3's telemetry feed. She froze. The same signal from earlier, faint but unmistakable. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Should she call it out? The signal vanished almost immediately, replaced by normal readings. Maybe it was nothing, static interference, a sensor glitch. She rubbed her temple. "Don't overthink it," she muttered. A group of younger mechanics gathered nearby, joking about lunch plans. One of them, Corporal Jess Perry, noticed Emily's frown. "Everything okay, Sarge?" Emily forced a neutral smile. "Just keeping an eye on the system." "Go grab chow." "I'll catch up." They shrugged and left. She waited until the hangar was quiet again, eyes fixed on the telemetry feed. Another blip, then another. Subtle, rhythmic, almost like a Morse code heartbeat. Her stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. She opened the maintenance log, cross-checking earlier diagnostics. The pattern matched an old bug from Block 3 software, an outdated firmware patch used years ago on deployed units overseas. But these were Block 5 systems. That error shouldn't exist here. Unless, she swallowed, unless the aircraft's central nodule hadn't been fully updated. Her radio crackled to life. "Command to Hangar 2. Carter, confirm your ground systems are stable." "Stable," she replied automatically, though her eyes never left the flickering signal. Outside, the desert sun blazed higher, casting white heat over the runway. Emily stepped to the hangar door, shielding her eyes as she watched the formation of jets gliding in perfect symmetry across the horizon. They looked flawless from here, 5 specks of silver slicing the sky. Only she knew one of them carried a secret problem waiting to surface. She returned to her console, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. If she flagged it now, the entire mission would be recalled. The pilots would have to circle back, and she'd be blamed for delaying a multi-million-dollar operation over what might be nothing. She looked again at the blinking green lights across the board, all systems nominal. The line that had glitched was steady now. Maybe she was overreacting. With a deep breath, she logged the session and closed the diagnostic window. The hum of the hangar returned, engines cooling, tools clattering, voices echoing. But in the back of her mind, the unease lingered like static. She turned off her monitor, gathering her notes, trying to shake it off. Yet, as she walked past the silent aircraft she'd worked on all night, the memory of that flicker stayed with her. A whisper from the machine itself, warning her that something unseen was still wrong. Outside, the roar of jets faded into the distance, swallowed by the endless Nevada sky. Emily paused at the doorway, glancing upward, a hand shielding her eyes. 6 dots streaked across the sunlit blue. One of them shimmered strangely, just for a moment. Then the sky swallowed them whole. Emily lowered her hand, the faintest chill creeping across her spine. She didn't know it yet, but the signal she'd ignored, that flicker she dismissed as nothing, would soon test everything she thought she'd left behind. The mechanic had done her part for the morning. The jets were airborne, the mission underway. But deep in her gut, she felt the quiet dread that comes before a storm, a feeling she hadn't known since her last deployment. And for the first time in years, Sergeant Emily Carter prayed she wasn't right. The desert sky stretched wide and merciless over Nellis Air Force Base, a pale blue ocean with no horizon. By mid-morning, the air shimmered with heat, and the runways pulsed under the sun. In the command tower, chatter filled the radios, clipped and professional. Outside, 6 F-35 Lightning eyes sat poised like predators at rest, canopies glinting in the light. On the tarmac, Sergeant Emily Carter stood behind the yellow safety line, headset pressed tight to her ears. Her heart matched the deep rhythmic hum of the turbines. She'd done this 100 times, watched them take off, vanish into the sky, and return hours later. But today, something about the air felt heavy, expectant. Tower to all cruise clear for ignition sequence. Engines screamed to life. The sound tore through the air, vibrating in her chest. Emily's pulse quickened despite herself. She looked toward Viper 3, piloted by Lieutenant Mark Henderson, the young hotshot who teased her earlier that morning. His jet's vertical stabilizers quivered slightly in the heat waves. Everything seemed fine, but that faint echo of doubt from the hangar refused to fade. Control check complete. Henderson's voice crackled through her headset. All readings normal. Emily frowned. Normal wasn't always safe. Machines had a way of lying until the very last moment. She scanned her diagnostics tablet one last time. 6 columns of data scrolled across the screen: pressure, fuel, hydraulics, navigation, electrical, flight control. For Viper 3, everything blinked green, except a half-second latency on his navigation feedback. Barely perceptible. Probably atmospheric interference. She bit the inside of her cheek. Carter, came Major Rourke's voice through the comm. We good to go? Yes, sir. All systems green. The words left her mouth before her brain caught up. It was protocol habit. Yet even as she said them, a knot tightened in her stomach. The jets began to taxi. One by one they rolled forward, engines thundering, the ground trembling beneath their weight. Dust whipped across the tarmac in tiny tornadoes. Emily's eyes followed them until her headset filled with the sound of clearance codes. Falcon Squadron, you are clear for takeoff. Godspeed. One by one, the F-35s roared down the runway, lifting into the blinding morning sky. Their afterburners left shimmering trails of heat and fire. Emily watched until they became dots against the blue, then turned toward the operations building. Inside, the command and control center buzzed with activity. Dozens of personnel monitored radar, communications, and telemetry feeds. The air smelled of coffee, cold metal, and anticipation. She took her usual seat at the far console, logging into the maintenance network that mirrored the jet systems in real time. Her screen lit up with 6 aircraft streams, each a heartbeat of data. Lines scrolled endlessly. Engine temperature, airspeed, angle of attack, system health. It was like watching 6 living creatures breathe. Falcon 1 to tower, we're at 5,000 and climbing. Copy, Falcon 1. Falcon 3 steady climb, all green. Emily's eyes flicked to Viper 3's feed. Everything looked steady until it didn't. A minor fluctuation blinked on the display. She leaned forward. Navigation drift, 0.004%. Harmless. At another. 0.006. Her brow furrowed. She zoomed in on the line graph. It pulsed irregularly, just like in the hangar. She adjusted her headset. Tower, this is Carter. I'm seeing minor navigation variants on Viper 3. Could be nothing, but I'd recommend a systems check. Copy, Carter, replied the control officer flatly, distracted. Variance within tolerance. Continue monitoring. She bit her lip. Within tolerance. Those two words had haunted her once before. She remembered hearing them the night a C-130 went down in Afghanistan. Variance within tolerance. They'd said, right before the engine gave out. Minutes passed. The jets maneuvered north toward the training range, massive expanses of desert where simulated targets waited. The control room settled into routine chatter, but Emily couldn't focus. Her eyes tracked Viper 3's data stream obsessively. Then the numbers spiked. Altitude drop. Pressure instability. A sharp red flash across the navigation feed. Her breath caught. Command, Viper 3 system is faulting, navigation link degraded. Confirm? Confirmed. Losing stability. It's replicating the same pattern as before. She finished. Henderson's voice cracked over the comms. Tower, this is Viper 3. I'm getting flight control lag response. Delays climbing, requesting diagnostic support. The room erupted into motion. Officers leaned over consoles. Rourke's voice boomed through. Get him a fix now. Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard. She ran a quick diagnostic. Nothing. The system didn't see the problem. It was inside the flight control algorithm, buried deep in firmware. She recognized the signature immediately, an old combat patch she'd seen deployed overseas years ago. Carter, Rourke barked. What's happening? It's a software cascade, she said, eyes darting across screens. Flight assist modules looping into redundancy. He's going to lose control if it locks. Can we override? Not remotely, sir. The onboard computer's rejecting uplink commands. The pilot's voice came again, tense now. Control lag, increasing, airframes starting to oscillate. I can't stabilize pitch. The telemetry showed his jet wobbling slightly in the air, a deadly dance. One wrong input, and he'd spiral out. Rourke slammed a fist on the console. Get him back to base. Emily swallowed. Sir, if he turns with a corrupted system, it'll fail completely. He won't make it. Silence fell for a split second. Around them, the screens glowed cold and relentless. Henderson's voice broke through again, higher, strained. Viper 3 to tower systems unresponsive. What do I do? Emily's heart pounded. She could hear the edge of fear in his tone, the same fear she'd once felt herself, pinned down under a sky filled with smoke and fire. She looked up at Rourke. Sir? Let me take the interface. He blinked. What? I can reach his onboard systems through the maintenance protocol. It's not standard procedure, but it's the only path left. Rourke hesitated. That's a high-risk override. You could crash his flight OSA entirely. I know, she said quietly. But if I don't, the system will do it for us. He studied her, this quiet mechanic he barely knew, and saw the conviction in her eyes. Do it. Emily plugged her console into the restricted maintenance channel. Lines of encrypted code spilled across the monitor. Her fingers moved with terrifying precision. Around her, the control room hushed, all eyes fixed on the woman who had suddenly taken command of the crisis. Viper 3, she called into the mic, her voice steady. This is Sergeant Carter on ground systems. I need you to listen carefully. A pause. Then, copy, Carter. Who the hell are you? Someone who's not letting you fall out of the sky. Now switch to manual input mode, right-hand panel. Static hissed in reply then. Manual mode engaged. Good. I'm sending a remote handshake request. Accept it when prompted. She executed the command. The cursor blinked once, twice, then connection established. The room collectively exhaled. Emily's mind ran calculations faster than the computer's. She identified the corrupted process, an endless feedback loop bleeding data between guidance modules. Her hands danced across the keyboard, isolating it, then injected a bypass command. "Come on," she whispered. A green line flickered. Stabilization data leveled slightly. Henderson's breathing came through the headset, still heavy but controlled. "I think it's holding." "Not done yet," she muttered. Rourke leaned over her shoulder. "Talk to me. I'm patching his flight assist auxiliary. It'll reroute the control feedback away from the corrupted node. It's risky, but it might buy him time." "Do it." Her fingers flew again. The cursor blinked furiously. Code streamed like rainfall. Then connection lost. "Damn it," she hissed. System rejected the patch. The pilot's voice spiked. "I'm losing control again." "Stay with me, Viper 3, Emily snapped, voice sharp now, commanding. "Manual stabilize counter, thrust 2% left, 3 down." "Now." "I got it holding." His breathing steadied slightly. The oscillation data began to flatten. Emily didn't look away from the screen. She was deep in it now, heart racing, muscles tense, eyes burning. Every keystroke felt like a heartbeat. She remembered the smell of burning sand, the sound of mortar rounds, the screaming of engines. Afghanistan, 2012 a night, she'd kept a wounded pilot alive with duct tape and raw will. History was repeating itself, and she refused to lose another one. "Carter," Rourke said softly, "how do you know all this?" She didn't answer. Her hands were already typing the final command. A progress bar crawled across the screen. Firmware patch uploading 87%. 90%. 95%. "Hold on, Lieutenant," she murmured. "Just a little longer." Outside, somewhere over the desert, a lone F-35 struggled against gravity and code. Inside the control room, one mechanic refused to look away. 100%. Patch successful. "Flight stabilization restored," came the system readout. The room erupted in cheers, but Emily didn't move. She sat back slowly, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the glowing green line of stable telemetry. "Viper 3, she said quietly into the mic, "you're clear to continue. Bring her home in one piece." "Copy that," Henderson replied, his voice a mix of awe and relief. "Whoever you are down there, you just saved my life." Emily muted her mic, finally allowing herself a shaky breath. Across the room, Major Rourke stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "That was exceptional," he said. "How the hell did you pull that off?" Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. "Just experience, sir." He frowned. "From where?" She turned back to her console, logging off. "Let's just say I've seen this kind of failure before, back when things were a lot louder." Rourke hesitated, wanting to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Outside the glass, the desert shimmered under the noon sun. 6 specks cut through the sky, one of them trailing faint heat distortion, but flying true. Emily removed her headset, resting it on the console. The chatter around her blurred into background noise. Her hands still trembled slightly. No one in that room yet understood what had just happened. To them, she was a miracle technician who'd made a lucky call. But deep inside, Emily knew it was more than that. She'd recognized the failure not from manuals or simulations, but from memory. The ghosts of war had whispered to her through the machine, and she had answered. As she stood to leave, Rourke's voice followed quietly. "Carter, remind me never to underestimate you again." She paused at the doorway, glancing back with a faint, tired smile. "Most people don't have to be reminded, sir. They just never noticed in the first place." And with that, she walked out of the command center, the roar of jet engines fading into silence, leaving behind a room full of stunned officers, and the lingering realization that the quiet mechanic from Hangar Two might just be more than she appeared. The control tower buzzed like a hornet's nest. Voices overlapped on the radio. Keyboards clattered, and screens flashed red alerts. The air reeked of hot coffee and panic. Somewhere above the Nevada desert, an F-35 was tumbling out of control, its systems failing faster than the technicians could react. "Viper 3, do you copy?" Major Rourke barked, gripping his headset so tight his knuckles whitened. Static answered him, followed by the shaky voice of the pilot, Lieutenant Daniels. "Controls slipping. My flight computer's freezing up. I can't level her." Emily Carter stood at the back of the room, eyes glued to the data stream running across the primary monitor. The pattern flashing in front of her, a rapid oscillation in the stabilization code, made her stomach twist. She'd seen it before. Not here, not under the safety of fluorescent lights, but in a desert halfway across the world, when enemy fire shredded an aircraft's guidance system and left the pilot spiraling toward the ground. She didn't wait for permission. Her boots clicked against the metal floor as she stepped closer to the console. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but firm. "That's not a software glitch. The flight controls misreading torque feedback from the actuator sensors. If we don't override manually, he's going to lose stabilization entirely." Major Rourke turned, face lined with disbelief. "You're a mechanic, Sergeant. Let engineering handle it." "With respect, sir," Emily said, meeting his gaze, "your engineers are reading from the manual. That system's already past the point of recovery through standard procedure." A lieutenant from avionics looked up, nervous. "She's right. The feedback loop's corrupting faster than the auto-recovery can compensate." Rourke hesitated. The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of Daniels breathing hard through the radio. "I'm upside down, altimeters spinning. Oh God, I can't." "Let me take control of the interface," Emily said. "I can stabilize the input manually through the diagnostic channel." "That's impossible," someone muttered. "The flight systems are locked mid-mission." "Not if you know how to talk to them," Emily replied, already moving to a nearby terminal. She didn't wait for approval this time. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up system access. "Route me to Viper 3's diagnostic relay." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, if you touch that system without clearance, then court-martial me later," she said, voice low but unyielding. "Right now, I'm the only one in this room who can keep that pilot alive." For a moment, the air itself seemed to freeze. The hum of electronics, the chatter, the noise all gone. Rourke stared at her, seeing not the quiet mechanic who kept to herself in the hangar, but someone with an iron steadiness he couldn't place. He gave a short nod. "Do it." Emily exhaled and began typing commands so fast the others could barely follow. "Viper 3, this is Control," she said over the radio. "I'm patching in through your auxiliary interface. Do not touch your flight computer. Just follow my instructions." Daniel's voice cracked through the static. Who the hell is this?" "Doesn't matter," she said. "Trust me." The data feed erupted with errors, numbers spilling across her screen like a waterfall. Emily leaned closer, muttering to herself. "Come on, talk to me." There you are. She found the fault lying an endless loop between the actuator sensors and the control computer. A death spiral in code. Viper 3, switch to manual trim override, channel 35. Manual? That's suicide. "Do it now, Lieutenant." There was a pause, then the sound of metal groaning over the comms. The data flickered. Emily smiled faintly. "Good. Now cut auxiliary power to your right stabilizer." "What?" "That'll destabilize me." "That's the idea. I'm going to resync the sensors." "Hold steady." Sweat beaded on her forehead. Around her, officers whispered in disbelief. "She's reprogramming a fighter jet mid-air," one said. That's not supposed to be possible. She's either insane or brilliant, another muttered. Emily ignored them. Her fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had done this in the worst possible circumstances. She remembered crouching under an aircraft in Afghanistan, gunfire cracking around her as she soldered a live circuit. Fear hadn't mattered then, and it didn't matter now. "All right, Viper 3, she said. Reset your primary flight path input to 0. On my Mark 3, 2, 1, execute." The telemetry feed spiked. The F-35's status icon on the main screen flashed yellow, then green. Daniel's breathing filled the channel. I think it's working. The controls are responding. "Stabilize at 5,000 feet, she ordered softly. "You're clear." The control room exploded in cheers. Some clapped. Others just stared in stunned silence. Rourke removed his headset, rubbing his temples. "You just did what an entire engineering division couldn't do in 5 minutes, he said. Emily leaned back, trying to steady her own breathing. Her hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "He'll need to land soon," she murmured. "That patch won't hold forever." As Daniels guided the jet safely back toward base, Rourke turned to her again. "How the hell did you know to do that?" Emily hesitated. For a heartbeat, old memories threatened to surface: sandstorms, screaming engines, the smell of burning fuel. She blinked them away. "Experience," she said simply. "From where?" Rourke pressed. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where a distant dot in the sky marked the returning F-35. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." The major studied her for a moment longer, then said quietly, "I think I might." By the time Viper 3 touched down, the entire airfield was waiting. The pilot climbed out, helmet tucked under his arm, face pale but alive. He looked around until his eyes found Emily standing near the tarmac. For a second, he just stared, confusion and gratitude blending together. "You the one who talked me through that?" he asked. Emily nodded. "You kept your cool. That's what saved you." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. You did." The words hit her harder than she expected. She gave him a tight smile and turned back toward the hangar. The sound of applause rippled faintly from the tower, but Emily didn't look back. She wasn't used to being a hero anymore. Inside the hangar's shadows, she removed her gloves and flexed her fingers, still tingling from tension. Her mind replayed every second of the crisis. She could still hear the whine of engines and the panicked breathing over the radio. It was too close to the past she thought she'd left behind. She sat on a crate, letting the noise of the base fade into the background. The desert wind slipped through the open doors, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and dust. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the tremor of what she'd done. A small voice inside whispered, "You swore you'd never do this again." But another part of her, the one that had saved lives, the one that refused to quit, answered back, "You didn't have a choice." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the runway, Emily Carter pulled her cap lower and rose to her feet. There would be questions, debriefings, maybe reprimands. She didn't care. Somewhere up there, a pilot was alive because she broke the rules. And for the first time in years, that felt right. The hangar fell eerily silent after the chaos of the near disaster. Every monitor still glowed with the ghost of red alerts, now fading into calm green. The crew was still catching their breath, hearts pounding, hands trembling over keyboards. Outside, the desert wind carried the echo of roaring engines, but inside, something else lingered: disbelief. Emily Carter stood near the center console, headset around her neck, face faintly illuminated by the dim blue of the screens. Her uniform sleeve was smeared with grease, her hair stuck to her temple with sweat. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a battlefield, not a maintenance bay. Major Rourke crossed his arms, still trying to process what had happened. "You realize what you just did, Sergeant?" he said finally. She gave a half smile, though her eyes were far away. "Kept a pilot alive. That's my job, isn't it?" "Your job is ground maintenance," he countered, voice firm but respectful. "Not remote combat troubleshooting. You broke 3 protocol chains to access that interface." Emily didn't flinch. "And if I hadn't, Lieutenant Daniels would be scattered across the desert right now." Rourke sighed, running a hand down his face. He couldn't argue with that. The truth was written all over the data logs. She had done something impossible, overridden a flight control system in real time mid-air. It was the kind of miracle engineers wrote about in classified briefings. The pilot's voice suddenly cut through the radio again. "Control, this is Viper 3. I've got stable flight control, but something's still off. I'm reading fuel system errors." Rourke froze. "Fuel errors?" Emily's heart rate spiked. She rushed back to the console. "Put him on speaker," she ordered, her tone snapping the room back to focus. "Viper 3, this is Carter. Talk to me. What do you see?" "Fuel pressure dropping fast. Left tank indicators fluctuating. Reading half empty 1 second, full the next." Emily muttered, "That's not a leak. That's a sensor misfire. But if it spreads, the autopilot will compensate and throttle down the engines." Rourke looked alarmed. "Meaning?" "Meaning it'll think it's saving fuel when it's actually cutting power mid-flight," she said grimly. "He'll drop out of the sky." Without hesitation, she started typing again, pulling up the onboard diagnostics. Every line of code and flashing gauge made her pulse hammer harder. She was running out of time. "Viper 3, divert to emergency return route," Rourke ordered. "Negative," Emily interjected sharply. "If he banks now, the misfire will cascade. Keep him steady. Don't touch the throttle." Rourke turned to her, voice rising. "Sergeant, you're not in command here. Then fire me after we get him home," she snapped. The tension in the room snapped like a live wire. Rourke stared at her, but something in her expression stopped him. The unflinching determination in her eyes, the calm, battle-born steadiness, told him she wasn't guessing. She knew. "All right," he said, finally nodding. "You're in charge." Emily took a deep breath and leaned over the console. "Viper 3, listen carefully. I'm going to isolate your fuel management system. You'll lose all automated support for about 30 seconds. You'll be flying manual, full control." "Manual? In this jet?" Daniel sounded terrified. "I'll be with you," she said softly. "You're not alone. I promise." Outside, the horizon was bathed in gold. The F-35 glided like a wounded bird through the fading sunlight, each movement heavy with strain. Inside the cockpit, Daniels gripped the stick, sweat dripping into his eyes. "Okay," Emily said, watching the telemetry. "Deactivate autopilot." "Now." He hesitated, then clicked the switch. The warning alarm screamed. The jet shuddered violently. Every monitor in the control room flashed red. Someone cursed under their breath. "Steady," Emily said. "Use your left stabilizer, small corrections only. You've got this." Daniel's breathing came rapid, panicked. I'm dropping altitude." "No, you're not. Trust the horizon. Don't look at the instruments. They're lying to you." Her voice, calm and precise, cut through his fear like a guiding hand. "I'm realigning your sensors. 10 seconds to stabilization. Hold her steady." She began rewriting live code, rerouting electrical pathways virtually, something no one else had dared to attempt. Each keystroke was a heartbeat. 5 seconds. The F-35's velocity readings began to normalize. 3 seconds. Fuel indicators reset. 1 second. The aircraft leveled. Control restored, Danielle said, half laughing, half crying into the mic. Holy hell, she flies. The entire control tower erupted. Officers clapped, some even cheered. Someone shouted, "She did it again." Rourke looked at Emily in awe. "You just rewrote flight diagnostics mid-air." "That's not repair work. That's surgery." Emily exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing. "Just muscle memory," she said quietly. Rourke stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You keep saying that. Where'd you get that kind of muscle memory, Sergeant?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes were still fixed on the screen, where the F-35's flight path shimmered across the map like a pulse line. Finally, she said, "Once upon a time, sir, I didn't work on jets that landed safely." Rourke studied her face. There was something in her tone, the weight of loss, of fire, of silence after explosions. He nodded slowly. Understood. By the time the F-35 touched down, night had fallen over the base. The desert wind had cooled, sweeping through the runway like a whisper. Floodlights bathed the tarmac in white. Crew members waited, holding their breath as the jet's wheels kissed the ground. Daniel stepped out of the cockpit, unsteady but grinning. He spotted Emily standing at the edge of the hangar, arms crossed, waiting. "You saved my life," he said. She smirked faintly. "You saved your own. I just gave you the tools." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Then I owe you a drink, ma'am." "Save it," she replied, turning toward the hangar. "You'll need both hands for the debrief." Rourke watched her go. The quiet stride, the shoulders heavy with something deeper than pride. He'd seen combat veterans before. The way they carried themselves, the silence they wrapped around their memories. It all made sense now. As she disappeared into the shadows of the hangar, he said to himself, "That woman's seen war." Inside, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. She sat on a metal step near the maintenance bay, the sound of clinking tools echoing faintly around her. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by exhaustion and ghosts. She could still see another hangar, years ago, in another desert. The color of the sand was different, but the fear was the same. She'd been younger, faster, but just as stubborn. Back then, a pilot named Ramirez had been her Viper 3. She'd guided him home too, except that time, the jet hadn't made it. The explosion had lit up the sky, and the shockwave had thrown her to the ground. She'd woken up in a medical tent 2 days later, with burns on her hands and silence in her chest. They'd called her a hero. She'd called it failure. That was the last mission she'd ever flown support on. After that, she'd asked to be reassigned, to quiet work, somewhere far from war zones. And yet, here she was, years later, saving another pilot mid-mission, with the same steady hands that once trembled from grief. She looked down at her palms. The faint scars still showed under the grease and oil. She flexed her fingers slowly, almost reverently. Maybe the universe had just decided she wasn't done yet. Outside, the sound of the jets taking off again broke through her thoughts, the rhythmic roar of engines, strong and alive. Emily looked up toward the night sky, following the glowing trail of afterburners as they vanished into the stars. She smiled faintly. "The sky," she whispered, "never really lets you go." Morning sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the operations center, glinting off steel desks and computer monitors. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that follows chaos. The night before, the base had been electric with tension, but now everyone moved quietly, eyes darting toward one woman who had done what no one else dared. Sergeant Emily Carter sat alone at the far end of the table in the debriefing room. Her uniform sleeves were rolled up, faint scars visible beneath the grease stains. She looked calm, almost indifferent, but there was something guarded in her expression, a look of someone used to scrutiny and disappointment. Major Rourke entered, his clipboard under one arm, followed by Colonel Hastings, the base commander. Hastings was tall, sharp-eyed, and the kind of man who'd seen enough missions to know when a story didn't add up. "Sergeant Carter," the colonel began, his tone controlled but curious, "you're the talk of the entire division." Emily gave a small, humorless smile. "Not sure that's a good thing, sir." Rourke cleared his throat. "It's not every day a mechanic rewires an F-35 in mid-air and brings a pilot back alive. The Pentagon wants to know how you managed it." Emily kept her gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table. "I followed training. Improvised where I had to." "Improvised?" Hastings asked. "Sergeant, your so-called improvisation involved overriding classified control systems that even senior engineers aren't cleared to touch." Her jaw tightened. "Then I guess it's a good thing I didn't ask permission first." The colonel leaned forward. "You realize that's insubordination, right?" Emily met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "Would you rather I let him die?" The silence stretched. Rourke shifted uncomfortably, hiding a faint smirk. He admired her nerve, even if it made his commanding officer's blood pressure spike. Finally, Hastings sighed and slid a folder across the table. The edges were worn, the label faded. Carter, Emily L. Classified records. Emily's heart stilled. She hadn't seen that file in years. "We ran your clearance check after last night," Hastings said. "Turns out, you weren't always a ground mechanic." Rourke frowned, glancing at the file. "Sir?" Hastings opened it. Inside were old photographs. A younger Emily, wearing desert fatigues, crouched beside an A-10 Thunderbolt II, hands black with soot. Another photo showed her with a small maintenance team, smiling awkwardly, a combat patch visible on her shoulder. "U.S. Air Force Combat Support Squadron," Hastings read aloud. "Deployment, Kandahar Airfield, Afghanistan. 5 years active duty before transfer to engineering corps." He paused. "And then this." He turned the page. "Commendation for valor, awarded after a Lev fire repair during active engagement." The room went still. Rourke blinked. "Live fire repair?" Emily exhaled slowly. "That was a long time ago." The colonel ignored her deflection. "According to this report, you went out under heavy mortar fire to fix a downed A-10. The pilot was still trapped inside. You manually rebooted the flight system and hotwired the ignition, while the enemy was advancing." Rourke leaned back, stunned. "That's impossible." Emily gave a wry smile. "So was last night, apparently." Hastings' eyes narrowed. "The pilot didn't make it, did he?" Her expression hardened. "No, sir." That one word carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. "He was hit during takeoff," she continued quietly. "I got the engine running, but the cockpit took another round. He didn't survive the blast." The colonel's tone softened. "And you stayed with the wreck until they pulled you out?" "I didn't want him to die alone." The room fell completely silent. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound. Rourke finally spoke, his voice low. "So that's why you left the combat division?" Emily nodded. "They called it reassignment for psychological recovery. I called it exile." Hastings closed the file gently. "You've been hiding your record ever since." "I didn't hide it, sir," she said. "I just stopped leading with it. No one asks about your past if you keep your head down and do your work." Rourke studied her, the stoic calm, the quiet efficiency, the fierce competence that made sense now. Everything about her screened experience earned the hard way. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. Emily's gaze dropped to her hands. Because people stop seeing you as a person when they read that file. They see a headline, not what it cost you to earn it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Hastings stood, pushing the chair back. Sergeant Carter, your actions yesterday saved one of my pilots and an aircraft worth $30 million. But more importantly, they reminded my team what real composure under fire looks like. That's not something you can train. Emily straightened. Thank you, sir. He gave her a nod. You'll receive an official commendation. The press will want a statement. Her expression stiffened. I'd prefer not to. Rourke grinned faintly. You're not big on attention, huh? Never was, she replied. After the meeting, Emily walked out into the sunlight. The hangar glowed silver in the distance, the hum of machinery and chatter of young techs filling the air. She passed by a group of new recruits, one of whom whispered, "That's her." The one who saved Viper 3. Emily pretended not to hear, but a faint blush touched her cheeks. She wasn't used to admiration or eyes following her with respect. Back in her workspace, she picked up a wrench and returned to the unfinished F-35 she'd been repairing before the mission. As she leaned under the fuselage, the smell of oil and metal grounded her. This was where she belonged, where things made sense. Machines didn't lie. They broke, and you fixed them. Simple, predictable. But as she worked, her mind wandered back to Afghanistan, to the roar of engines, the grit in her teeth, the rush of adrenaline as she crawled beneath a burning jet. She could still hear Ramirez's voice, calling out over the combs, still feel the shockwave when the fuel line exploded. And she could still remember the silence that followed. A shadow fell across her. It was Rourke. You okay? He asked. She wiped her hands on a rag. Just thinking. He leaned against the jet beside her. The colonel's right, you know. You did something incredible. Emily gave a faint smirk. You ever think maybe I just got lucky? Rourke shook his head. Luck doesn't type 100 lines of code in 30 seconds and talk a pilot through a manual override mid-freefall. She chuckled softly. Fair point. He hesitated, then said quietly, You know, most people spend their lives trying to prove they're something special. You already are, and you don't even want the credit. Emily met his eyes. There was kindness there, the kind that made her uncomfortable. She shrugged it off. Credit doesn't bring people back. Rourke nodded slowly. No, it doesn't, but maybe it keeps their memory alive. Her eyes softened. Maybe. He straightened and started to walk away, then stopped. By the way, he added, glancing back, the colonel's having the press conference tomorrow. He's going to tell your story, whether you show up or not. Emily sighed, looking back at the jet's sleek metallic frame. Guess I'll have to clean up then. As Rourke walked off, she looked up at the ceiling of the hangar, where sunlight filtered through the beams. The noise of the base faded for a moment, replaced by the faint echo of a memory. A friend's laughter, a plane's engine starting, the sound of a promise she'd once made to never stop fixing what was broken. Maybe this time, that promise applied to herself too. Night blanketed the base in a quiet hum of machines and desert wind. The hangar stood in silhouette against the pale glow of floodlights. Inside one of them, Sergeant Emily Carter sat alone on a workbench, her uniform jacket folded neatly beside her. The day's applause, the congratulations, the strange new attention, all of it felt like noise she couldn't turn off. She turned a small wrench between her fingers, the cold metal catching the light. The rhythmic click of the ratchet filled the silence like a heartbeat. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts weren't. It had been years since she'd felt this exposed, her past dragged out from behind the curtain she'd carefully built. Recognition wasn't something she ever wanted. When people looked at her now, they didn't see a quiet mechanic anymore. They saw a war story. The memory of Afghanistan had never truly faded. It came back in flashes, the searing heat, the stench of smoke and jet fuel, the deep orange of the sky when mortar hit too close. She remembered the shouting, the chaos, the roar of engines trying to take off amid the barrage. And she remembered Ramirez, her old pilot. His voice still haunted her. "Carter, if we can't get this thing running, none of us are making it out." She could still see his gloved hand pounding the dashboard, the panic hidden behind a thin layer of soldier's bravado. She'd fixed that plane, fixed it under fire, hands shaking but sure. But when it lifted off the ground, it had only made it 200 feet before the blast hit. The shock wave threw her backward, and when she woke up, there was nothing left but flame and silence. It was the kind of silence that never really leaves you. A knock came on the hangar door. Emily blinked, coming back to the present. Major Rourke stepped in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He looked tired but lighter than usual, as if the weight of yesterday's panic had finally settled. "Figured you'd still be here," he said, setting 1 mug beside her. Emily smirked faintly. "You figured right." He sat on the workbench across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the base generators filled the gaps between them. "You made quite the impression today," Rourke said finally. "Half the recruits are calling you the Jet Whisperer." She rolled her eyes. "Please tell me that's not sticking." He laughed. "Too late for that. Once the Colonel's story hits the press, you're going to be the Air Force's new poster hero." Her expression darkened. "That's exactly what I didn't want." "Why?" he asked. "You earned it." "Because they'll turn it into something it wasn't," she said quietly. "They'll talk about bravery and quick thinking, not the fear, not the luck, not the cost of every mistake. They'll make it sound clean." Rourke studied her, the flicker of fluorescent light catching the tired lines on her face. "You think that's wrong?" "I think it's dishonest," she said. "War isn't a highlight reel. It's messy. It's survival. And sometimes it's just doing what has to be done." Her voice trembled for the first time since he'd known her. She tried to hide it behind another sip of coffee, but Rourke noticed. "You still carry it," he said softly. "All of it." Emily's hands tightened around the mug. "You don't forget something like that. You just learn how to live around it." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the faint glow of the runway lights reflected off the metal wings of the parked jets. Somewhere far off, a pilot was running pre-flight checks, engines spooling up like distant thunder. Rourke finally spoke. "You know, I read the rest of your file." She arched a brow. "Should I be flattered or concerned?" He smiled, a little of both. "You were the youngest field mechanic to receive a Valor citation in your division. You saved 6 aircraft and their pilots before you were 25. And then you disappeared from active duty records." "Yeah," she said. "I told them I was done, but you came back." "I came back to fix machines, not people," she said, setting her mug down. "Engines don't bleed. Metal doesn't scream." Rourke leaned forward. "You fixed more than a machine yesterday." She looked away. "Don't romanticize it, Major." He chuckled softly. "Maybe not. But you can't pretend it didn't mean something to that pilot, to the crew, to everyone watching. You reminded them what it means to stay calm when everything's falling apart." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the flight line outside, the F-35s glinting under the moonlight like sleeping beasts. "When Ramirez died," she said suddenly, "I told myself I'd never get close to that again. Never risk that kind of loss. But yesterday, when Viper 3 started falling, I didn't even think. I just acted. Like something in me woke up that I'd tried to bury." Rourke nodded slowly. "Maybe that part of you was never gone, just waiting for the right reason to show up again." She gave a faint smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Maybe. Later that night, long after Rourke left, Emily walked along the tarmac alone. The wind was cold, brushing against her face as she passed rows of jets resting under the stars. She stopped beside the F-35 she'd saved, Viper 3. Its metallic skin gleamed under the floodlights, immaculate now after maintenance. She laid a hand on the cool metal, tracing the faint scratches near the wing. "You're a stubborn one," she whispered. The hum of the airfield surrounded her, a symphony of life, motion, and steel. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost among the living. She'd been a shadow for so long, hiding from what she'd been. But now, standing here, she felt something else stirring. Not pride, not peace, but purpose. She realized that maybe her life hadn't ended in that desert years ago. Maybe it had just changed shape, from the battlefield to the hangar, from saving pilots with tools instead of bullets. Every scar, every sleepless night, every wrench turn, it all meant something again. As dawn approached, the first light painted the desert in shades of gold and red. Emily sat on the edge of the runway, watching the horizon brighten. A small group of recruits walked past, saluting her shyly. She gave a nod in return. For them, she wasn't a ghost. She was living proof that courage didn't vanish when the war ended. It just found new places to breathe. She smiled faintly to herself. "The weight you carry," she murmured, "only means you're still standing." In the distance, an F-35 roared into the sky, splitting the morning quiet. She watched it climb higher and higher, its silhouette catching the sun like a silver arrow. Her reflection shimmered faintly in its polished surface before it disappeared into the clouds. And for the first time in a long time, Emily Carter didn't feel heavy anymore. The morning sun glinted off polished boots and gleaming metals as the entire airbase assembled on the tarmac. Rows of pilots, mechanics, and officers stood at attention, their faces shaded by the brim of their caps, eyes squinting against the harsh desert light. Today was unusual. Something beyond routine inspections and training was happening. A ceremony, whispered about for days, but without a name attached to it. Sergeant Emily Carter had received the summons the night before. A note from Colonel Hastings simply said, "Report to the tarmac at 0900 for special recognition. Formal uniform required." That was all. No explanation. No hint that anyone at the base had any idea who she really was, or why she deserved it. Emily had spent the morning checking her tools, double-checking her work, trying to convince herself she didn't care. Yet as she approached the tarmac now, her chest tightened. The rows of personnel stretched farther than she expected. Something about the silence was deafening. Colonel Hastings stepped forward at the podium, crisp and commanding. Beside him, Major Rourke's presence brought a familiar anchor. Emily stood a little apart from the formation, hands folded behind her back, uniform pristine, gloves tucked into her belt. "Good morning, everyone," Hastings began. His voice carried across the crowd, precise and steady. "We are here today to recognize extraordinary action under pressure, dedication beyond protocol, and courage that saved lives." He paused, scanning the ranks. Emily felt his gaze settle on her before it swept across the others. "Sergeant Emily Carter," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Step forward." Emily froze. The murmurs around her grew into whispers, curious glances traveling up and down the rows of officers and pilots. She stepped forward, stiff, her boots crunching against the gravel tarmac. The sun glinted harshly off the polished metal of her nameplate, but it couldn't hide her tension. Hastings gestured toward the podium. "Sergeant Carter, yesterday you demonstrated extraordinary technical skill and calm under pressure. When one of our F-35 pilots experienced catastrophic system failure mid-mission, you acted decisively, overriding protocols and stabilizing the aircraft. saving both pilot and plane. Emily's chest tightened. She kept her gaze on the horizon, at the crowd, as the words sank in. The applause started softly, then grew into a wave that rolled over the tarmac. People she barely knew, young mechanics, newly assigned pilots, cheered. Hastings continued. What most don't know is that Sergeant Carter did not act blindly. She drew on years of experience in combat, where she faced similar dangers and overcame them, time and again. Her calm decisiveness exemplifies the finest tradition of our Air Force. Emily finally looked at the crowd. Faces she had seen fleetingly in the hangar stared at her with awe. Some nodded subtly, others clutched their hats over their hearts. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of acknowledgement she had avoided for so long. The colonel reached into a folder and pulled out a medal, gleaming in the morning sun. For extraordinary heroism and selfless dedication, I present the Air Force Commendation Medal to Sergeant Emily Carter. He pinned it carefully to her uniform. The medal felt heavy, both physically and symbolically. She touched it briefly, eyes still lowered. Every memory she'd tried to bury, every fire, every explosion, every pilot she couldn't save, seemed to pulse behind the metal ribbon. Major Rourke stepped beside her quietly. You deserve this, he said softly. More than anyone realizes. Emily nodded, unable to find words. She had always believed recognition was fleeting, meaningless. Today, it felt different, not because she wanted praise, but because it honored the weight she had carried alone for so long. Hastings raised his voice again. Let Sergeant Carter's actions remind us all that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, steadfast resolve of one person, acting under impossible circumstances, that changes everything. A pilot in the first row, young and inexperienced, whispered to a colleague, I want to be like her. Emily caught the words and for the first time allowed herself a faint, almost shy smile. The applause rolled on as she turned to face the crowd, shoulders straight. She scanned the faces, the young mechanics, the airmen, the pilots, all looking at her not just as a mechanic, but as someone who had made a difference. The medal glinted in the sun, but it was more than medal. It was a silent acknowledgement of everything she had survived and everything she had done to keep others alive. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed slowly. Emily lingered, feeling the strange quiet of being recognized. For so long, she had carried her past like an invisible weight. Every wrench turned, every engine repaired, every sleepless night was part of it. But standing there, medal on her chest, she realized she was not carrying it alone anymore. Rourke approached, smiling faintly. You're going to be the talk of every base from here to Nellis, he said. I don't care, she replied, touching the medal lightly. I just want to keep doing my job. He nodded. And you will. But now, they know what we've always known. Emily glanced at him, curious. They know, he said, that sometimes heroes walk among us quietly, without asking for credit. And sometimes they just fix a plane mid-air and save a life. She allowed herself a small laugh, a sound she hadn't heard in years. It felt strange and light, like the first breath after being underwater. Later, back in the hangar, Emily removed her gloves and hung her jacket. She looked at the rows of F-35s gleaming in the afternoon sun. Each one represented lives she'd helped preserve, missions she'd quietly safeguarded. Her hands traced a faint line along the fuselage of Viper 3's jet, polished and ready for its next flight. A young recruit approached, eyes wide. Sergeant Carter, sir says. You saved him. You're a legend. Emily looked down at him, her smile soft. Legend? She said lightly. No, I just did what had to be done. The boy nodded, still staring, as she walked past. She didn't need the title or the applause. She had the quiet knowledge that she had acted when it mattered most. That alone was enough. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the hangar floor. Emily stood at the edge of the tarmac, looking out over the desert. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and purple, the wind carrying the faint hum of distant jets preparing for evening drills. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: peace. Not because her past was gone, but because she had faced it and turned it into something meaningful. She had survived, and she had saved others in the process. And in that moment, standing among the machines she loved and the people she had protected, Emily Carter realized that recognition wasn't about glory. It was about the quiet courage to act when the world demanded it, and the strength to keep carrying on, even when no one else was watching. She touched the metal again, a faint glint in her eyes. "The sky never forgets," she whispered. "And neither do I." The desert stretched endlessly before her, silent and vast, but for Emily, it was no longer empty. It was full of lives saved, lessons learned, and the unspoken promise that she would never stop protecting what mattered most. The desert sun rose high over the airbase, casting long shadows across rows of F-35s, gleaming like silver arrows on the tarmac. The base was alive again, with the rhythm of engines spooling, technicians calling out over radios, and the faint hum of life in a place where chaos and order constantly collided. But amidst the routine, there was a quiet shift in the air, a subtle acknowledgement of something larger than any mission, any protocol, or any drill. Sergeant Emily Carter walked through the hangar, boots echoing against the polished concrete. The metal on her chest caught the sunlight with every step, a reminder of yesterday's ceremony, of a past she had long carried silently. She moved with her usual focus, checking instruments, tightening bolts, and monitoring diagnostics. But now, the crew she passed didn't just see a mechanic. They saw someone who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. She paused beside Viper 3's jet, running her gloved fingers along the polished fuselage. The aircraft, restored and ready for its next sortie, had become more than a machine to her. It was a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the quiet impact one person could have. From the corner of the hangar, Major Rourke approached, carrying a stack of reports and a faint smile. "Morning, Sergeant," he said. "Looks like the press coverage from yesterday is starting to ripple through the division." Emily didn't look up. "Let them talk. I'm here to make sure these jets fly safely, not to read headlines." He chuckled. "Fair enough. But it seems the world already knows what we've known for years." She finally met his gaze, the sunlight catching the subtle weariness around his eyes. "Sometimes it feels like the world notices only when someone almost dies. Or when someone saves a life," Rourke replied, his tone gentle. "And you've done that more than once." Emily gave a faint nod, turning back to her work. But the weight of recognition lingered differently now, not oppressive, not uncomfortable. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the years of training, of experience in combat zones, of long nights spent repairing machinery that didn't forgive mistakes. In the weeks that followed, the story of Emily Carter spread quietly but persistently through the Air Force. Pilots told new recruits about the mechanic who had stabilized an F-35 mid-flight, who had guided a panicked pilot through a failing aircraft as if she were reading the machine's mind. Young technicians came to the hangar seeking guidance, asking questions about procedures, wiring, and diagnostics, but also about courage, resolve, and keeping calm when everything seemed impossible. Emily answered their questions with patience, never boasting, never embellishing. She had learned long ago that stories of heroism often stripped away the cost, the fear, the doubt, and she preferred to leave those details unspoken. Yet her calm presence spoke louder than any medal. Her quiet example became the standard for those who watched her work. One afternoon, as Emily was recalibrating an F-35's avionics, a young pilot approached nervously. "Sergeant Carter?" he said, voice hesitant. I just wanted to say, thank you for saving me last week. I didn't know who to look for, but you fixed the jet. You saved us all." Emily paused, resting her hands on the console. "You saved yourself," she said softly. "I just helped you along the way." The pilot blinked, unsure how to respond, and then nodded slowly, a smile breaking across his face. For Emily, moments like this were more meaningful than medals, ceremonies, or recognition. Each life preserved, each pilot reassured, each student learning the importance of composure. That was her legacy. Back in the command center, Colonel Hastings convened a meeting to discuss broader recognition for Emily's contributions. "She embodies the Air Force's highest standards," he said, reviewing the reports from the mid-mission stabilization and the earlier combat operations that had remained classified until now. Her actions saved lives, preserved expensive equipment, and reminded every officer and enlisted member what courage and skill look like in practice. Major Rourke leaned back in his chair, watching Emily work silently on a console nearby. "Sir," he said, "she doesn't do it for recognition. She's never been about medals." Hastings nodded. "I know. That's why we need to ensure her story is recorded properly, not just for headlines, but for institutional memory. Future pilots and mechanics need to understand the human element behind the machines." Emily glanced up from her work, catching part of the conversation. She didn't comment. She didn't need to. She had always understood that true heroism rarely seeks an audience. Later that evening, Emily walked across the tarmac as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and violet. The quiet was comforting, almost sacred. She stopped at the edge of the runway and looked at the jets lined up like sentinels, ready for whatever missions awaited them. A soft voice behind her startled her slightly. "Sergeant Carter?" She turned to see one of the younger mechanics, a kid barely out of training, holding a notebook and pencil. "Sir, I just wanted to ask you something." Emily gestured for him to speak. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Stay calm. Keep going. Even when everything's falling apart?" She thought about it for a long minute, the memories of sandstorms, mortar, smoke, and panic flashing in her mind. She thought about Viper 3 spinning out of control, the radio static, and the weight of responsibility pressing down like the desert sun. Then she smiled faintly. "You focus on what you can control," she said finally. "You do the work in front of you. You make decisions based on what you know, and you trust the people and the machines around you. That's all. One step at a time." The young mechanic nodded, absorbing her words like a lifeline. "Thank you, ma'am." Emily nodded once, turning back toward the horizon. The wind stirred, carrying the distant hum of engines and the faint scent of fuel. She felt a sense of closure that had eluded her for years. Not because her past was gone, it never would be, but because she had embraced it. Every mission, every life saved, every mistake survived had brought her here. Weeks turned into months. Emily's reputation became a quiet legend on the base. Pilots trained with her guidance, mechanics sought her advice, and officers learned to rely on her instincts. Yet she remained humble, never seeking fame, never boasting. The medal she had received was tucked safely in her locker, a silent acknowledgement of her service rather than a trophy. She often found herself at night, standing alone on the tarmac, staring at the stars above the desert. It was there she felt most at peace, the hum of the airbase below her feet, the wind brushing her face, the endless sky reminding her of the boundless possibilities of courage and resilience. One evening, Major Rourke joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one silently, and they stood side by side in companionable quiet. "You've changed the base," he said softly. "People talk about what you did, but they're learning something more. How to face fear. How to carry responsibility. How to be brave without needing to be noticed." Emily took a sip, letting the warmth settle into her hands. "I just do my job," she said quietly. "Maybe," he replied, "but you've done it better than anyone else could. And now, they'll remember." She glanced at him, the corner of her mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Good. Let them remember the work, not the person." Rourke nodded. "I think they'll remember both." As night settled fully over the base, Emily looked up at the sky, where stars twinkled like distant beacons. Somewhere above, F-35s streaked silently across the heavens, pilots following invisible paths through the night. She imagined each one carrying hope, skill, and lives she had helped protect. The medal on her chest might shine in ceremonies and photos, but the real legacy was invisible. The lives she had touched, the lessons she had taught, the courage she had inspired. And for the first time in a long time, Emily Carter felt that the weight she had carried for years was no longer a burden. It was a testament. She flexed her fingers, still scarred and calloused from years of work, and whispered to herself, "I survived. I saved, and I'll keep doing it." Above, the desert sky stretched endlessly, a vast canvas of light and possibility. And Emily Carter, once a quiet mechanic and hidden combat veteran, finally stood fully acknowledged, not just as a hero, but as a living legacy of courage, skill, and unwavering resolve. The airbase hummed with life, and she walked back toward the hangars, ready for whatever mission came next, knowing she had left her mark not in medals alone, but in the lives she had saved, the people she had inspired, and the courage she had quietly embodied.